Julie Bokser has joined us from Writing, Rhetoric, and Discourse. Julie is also the director of first year writing. And with Julie, we have Matthew Pearson, who works in the University Center for Writing-Based Learning and specializes in faculty development and helping design assignments and those sorts of things. And he also teaches courses over there. So I'd like to say welcome and thank you to you all for putting this workshop together.
Sounds good. So welcome again to everybody. I'm Matthew Pearson from the University Center for Writing-Based Learning. I also teach courses in writing, rhetoric, and discourse. And I administer a couple initiatives that some of you in this room have already taken advantage of. The Writing Fellows Program, which is peer writing tutors in the classroom, and also the in-class workshop initiative that we rolled out recently and have been in some of your classrooms already, I know, helping with any task related to writing, from citation to argument to digication, those kinds of things. The digication is the e-portfolio platform that we use at DePaul. So I look forward to working with you more after today as well.
Okay, hi. I'm Julie Bokser. I'm Associate Professor in Writing, Rhetoric, and Discourse, and I am Director of First Year Writing. And I'm really happy to be here right now. I'm a former director of the Writing Center, and that was in the early 2000s when I had a lot more exposure to what was going on in writing throughout the university. Now what I do is focus on helping students understand, okay, this is what college writing is about. They're going to prepare you to go to all your other writing classes in the university. So this is a great opportunity for me to hear from you. How well are we doing that? What else do we need to know? So I'm really interested, either maybe after the workshop, if there are things that you want to share with me about how we can better articulate first-year writing classes with the kinds of writing you do in the discipline, that this is a great opportunity for you to learn about that.
Julie and I really wanted to, up front, just talk about some of our central premises with this workshop. We'll be doing a workshop in the spring quarter through the same Teaching and Learning Certificate Program, Teaching Commons workshops about assessing student writing, about grading it. But because there's very little evidence of transferability when it comes to commenting on student writing, like so you comment on the first paper and tell them to do stuff on paper 2. There's almost no evidence that students can transfer that. We're talking today about commenting on writing that they can actually change. So we are making the argument that you should build in revision, whether it's through, I know some of you already do that, whether you're having them turn in a rough draft and then a final draft, or whether you're going to let them revise papers to do better, let whoever wants to have that initiative do that. We are saying that, especially for those of you who feel like you're over-commenters, you're probably mainly rationalizing a grade and not necessarily teaching transferable skills. I'm not trying to be, I wish it was transferable, I'm not trying to be the bearer of bad news, but a lot of the research just shows that saying like, you didn't have a lot of evidence for your claims in this paper, have more evidence in the next paper. There's not a lot of evidence that students can pull that up. You had a question? No? And so, we're talking about commenting on writing to improve student learning. One of the other things I just want to mention too, one of the other reasons we're not talking about grading today, and this is actually probably not surprising, but there's a really big body of research on the relationship between grading and student learning, and also grading and motivation. And basically, grading doesn't, especially when it comes to revising writing or getting better as a writer, whenever you give a student a grade, there's very little evidence that they're going to do anything to take up that to do better in the future or to revise. So grading is when you're done, when students are done, and commenting in depth, as we'll talk about today, using some of the best practices, is when they have a chance to actually grow as writers and try to make your class more like how writing is for us, where we have a chance to really explore ideas through the process of drafting and sharing with somebody else and making changes. So we will focus on research and best practices and commenting on writing, show some examples. We know from past times that we've done a workshop through the same program that having some time where we can actually look at the same draft together and comment on it and really talk about how to pull off some of these practices is helpful. So we are going to do our absolute best to leave a good amount of time for that, and also a lot of time at the end for discussion and Q&A about the particular draft that we comment on together, but also any other questions that you brought today or that today's workshop brings up for you. We will at the very end hand out a couple summary handouts that kind of put together some of the advice that we're talking about today, but that's what we're planning on doing, and we'll spend about half the time on the first thing and about half the time on the second two things.
So we're going to start by thinking about things that happen before you ever even get that stack of paper. So your introductions were great in helping us understand that you are over-commenters, the bad papers just make you want to get a new career, and very aware of that. But before you even talk about what do you do with that, there's things you can do in the classroom that will help you set up that commenting that you're going to do once you get the stack of paper. So let's start there. One of the things is to go meta. So you've got, one of the things, this is, you get your class together and you talk to them about what do they think is the purpose of comments. Ask your students, why do teachers comment? What kinds of comments help you revise and have them talk about it in the class setting? What kinds of comments are not helpful? And in a little while you'll see a video of some students talking about that. And ask them, what advice would you give teachers about commenting? And just having that discussion, setting it up, asking students for advice on that sort of thing is going to make them feel like they have agency, and you will learn a ton by having that conversation. You also want to discuss in class how you respond and why you respond in that way. So what's your commenting style? And so what I mean by that is what's your goal? What do you, when you comment, what do you do? You know, the kind of thing you just told each other, presumably. You want to talk about common vocabulary you have in the classroom. And you use that vocabulary in the classroom, and then you also use it in your papers. So for example, in first year writing, we're talking about thesis statements. One of the ways to say, what is a thesis statement? The thesis statement has to answer the so what. It has to say, why is this important? You use that so what vocabulary in class to teach thesis statement, and you can write so what in the margins. And they know what you meant because you've had this whole background of stuff going on in class that they nod when they get that comment. You also can talk about any shorthand you use. You know, these days we've all heard you never should write awk in the margin. Sometimes you still do it, but tell them, you know, any kind of abbreviations you use should be clear to students before they even get a paper. What are your abbreviations and what do they mean? What do you expect them to do with the comments? Should be something that is clear to them. You might have like different ways in which you use marginal comments and end comments. So Matthew and I are sort of similar, where we read through marginal comments about the very local thing that I feel or notice at that particular point. End comment, we try and summarize and give bigger picture issues. Now, I just read, we have our first year writing faculty do teaching portfolios where they post comments for us to evaluate their work. And there's really a star faculty member who's just got marginal comments on some of his papers. So I don't think like that, what we do is probably more classic, but there's lots of different ways to do it. But then he needs to also be telling his students, I use my marginal comments in this way. He occasionally has an end comment, but it's like, go back and look at my marginal comments and do that, you know, follow what I said there. So it's, how do you use your comments? And tell them about your pet peeves. What things on papers really annoy you? For me, it's quotation marks. I hate when the comment is not inside the quotation marks. And I show it on the board, and I show them how it's, you know, how do you punctuate it, and I say I'm going to comment on this, I'm going to mark it on your paper, or I'm just going to circle it, and they know what, this annoys me, and so then they avoid that. So giving pet peeves and making them explicit. Then we've got these last two, have students reflect on drafts and have students, and show them examples. Next slide. I'm going to show them together. So here's an example. And one of the examples for me that's important is to show students what I mean by revision. Because I want them to revise. Well, what does revise mean? It doesn't mean just change the words. It doesn't mean just make it a little neater this time. For me, it means go back, rethink the ideas, make this more focused, make sure it addresses the assignment in an even more specific way. So this is a paper from an upper-level English class and word cross-listed class called Composition and Style. The assignment is to write a creative nonfiction piece, and this is his first draft. Should somebody else read this?
We're in love with coffee. It's such a simple thing. Most American adults drink it daily. It's available in most every workplace in that nation, and you can't walk down a commercial street in any major city without passing a Starbucks. We consume 9 pounds of the stuff for every man, woman, and child in the nation, parentheses, and we don't even come close to drinking those. Coffee beans are a globally traded commodity, but we don't give them much thought.
Okay. So it's perfectly fine, but it's pretty boring, would be my assessment. And I don't really know why he's talking about coffee, and this is, it's a personal essay of creative nonfiction, and there's really no reason why I'm hearing about this, so it's okay. So I have an assignment where after they write the first draft, and alongside the first draft, they also write me what their objective was. What I was trying to do here was. And I have this one rhetorical goal that I'm trying to accomplish, and they articulate that for me. And afterwards we have a handout where you can see a version of that kind of assignment in more specifics. But it's essentially an accompanying assignment to the main assignment. I don't grade that accompanying thing, but I require it. It needs to be there because it tells me what they're thinking. So he answers his objectives, and he basically says I had writer's block. I didn't know what to do. I almost wrote about laundry detergent because I was doing my laundry. Then I was drinking a lot of coffee, so I wrote a paper about coffee. I know it stinks, but I have a good idea of what I think I could do with it, but it's not there yet. This is incredibly helpful to me. I mean, this statement then actually can become what I respond to when I comment, and it did here. So I said, well, I like that you worked through the block. That was great. It's well written, but feels forced. If you don't drink coffee much, then why are you writing about it? In much of the paper, there's a lot of research, but there isn't as much of his stance. What we need you to do is balance the research and the personal better and find your stance toward coffee. And then here's his revision. When I was a child, coffee was a mysterious thing. It was a black bitter beverage that all grown-ups were fixated on, but its flavor was one of the most repulsive things I knew. And I couldn't avoid it just by not drinking it. Every Christmas stocking in our house was stuffed with a bag of assorted Jelly Bellies, and every Christmas morning I'd eat a brown jelly bean, hoping for chocolate or root beer, only to have to spit coffee in the garbage and spend the next 5 minutes rinsing my mouth. He goes on and talks about from an adult standpoint. The adults were drinking black coffee and enjoying it. How could they like it? There was a secret about coffee that adults knew, but I, a child, could not fathom it. It was the same secret that made the McNeil Lehrer News Hour interesting and opera entertaining. It would remain a secret for a long time to come. He really hit it. I mean, this was great. This is a fabulous revision. It's the same topic. And so it's a good thing to, this is what I mean by revision. He has the same exact topic here, but he found his angle into it. And I've shown it, even though this was for an upper level class, I've shown it in first year writing. The students get, oh, okay, it's revision. Like none of the words are the same. This is like same idea, but completely just redid it. This is one approach to revision that helps to explain what revision is all about, shows them a model of good writing, a model of something that needed to be revised, shows them how to use comments. I think that all of those things are really important for them to understand what's going on. So that was about examples and the accompanying reflective assignment telling me what they're doing. So that's what this is doing. And I post this entire document with both versions of the paper, long version, on D2L so they can see it whenever they want to. Okay, so here are our responses for why we comment. First of all, we want to dramatize the reader. You want to, have the student really, writing is all about writing to an audience. It's all about the reader. But students don't always get that. It's difficult. It's a difficult task. And so as a commenter, you're dramatizing how you feel about a reader. So here is one example, you can see that, of a comment that dramatizes a reader. So the marginal on the left says, I like the metaphor, but the way this is worded confuses me. I had to read the first half of the sentence a couple of times before I understood what it meant. So this one is not directive. It's just here's what I experienced while I was reading it, dramatizing that reader. This is how it feels, and showing the student what it's like. So that's one reason to comment. Another one is to push their thinking. We're dialoguing with students. You're trying to treat them as an apprentice. Not tell them what to do, but bring them along with you and think about let me show you how I do things. Let's have a dialogue about it. So here's a comment that's trying to push thinking in the student. You claim that Obama's strategies are most appealing to moderate, undecided Americans. You don't mention this group in the body of the paper, though. I think you need to work harder to show why you think these particular strategies will speak to whose particular audience, the undecided. So, something that was mentioned but needs to be much more developed, and you're pushing them that way. Then another reason why we comment is to push students, to show them that revision is all about discovery. It's about finding something to say. You write that first draft, but it wasn't until the second draft where that student, Matt, knew what it was he wanted to say about copy. So here's a comment that's pushing somebody towards discovery. And this is about Anne Romney, not me. I think you need to come up with more to say about Romney's rhetoric and to make sure you don't repeat yourself. Ask yourself, in what ways do her comments about mothers work? In what ways are they less successful? Who might she offend by appealing to mothers, and why? This is from her convention speech. So just a series of questions that helps the student to discover what it was they have to say. And discovery and pushing thinking can go together, and they're doing the same, similar work at least.
Julie, can I say something
Yes.
really quickly about this? One of the things that, this is actually one of Julie's comments, and I think it's a good example of a comment that probably a lot of us in this room might write, whether it's an end comment or a marginal comment near a paragraph that addressed this. But this is a great example of where building in time for revision and the student actually being able to answer these questions makes a big difference in their learning. It's not just, if this is a comment on something they can't change, they are probably not going to answer any of these questions. They're not going to be like, those are interesting points, because I feel so passionately about articulating my stance on Anne Romney's speech, I am now going to think about these things and talk about them with my friends. Not going to happen. So this is a good example of where that building in that time. So one of the things that I think that we'll talk a little bit more about, but just to be clear, it may mean that you can cover less stuff if there's more time spent on some drafting, but it probably, and we can feel pretty confidently done right based on research, will probably lead to more student learning at the end of the quarter. So if you cover less stuff, but they have more of a chance to dive into it and really apprentice with your guidance, they're more likely to probably come away knowing more at the end of the class than if there was more stuff covered, but they didn't really get to dive in and play around with it.
Well, you guys are talking kind of without even thinking about it, about specifically writing classes. And I'm responsible for content, and writing is a tool that I use to teach it, but to get students who haven't had much art history to a point where they can actually do research in art history, write an art history paper, revise it, give me time to get them back. And then, to revise or do anything based on my comments. And because the university literally has, page numbers dictated for our assignments, that wasn't, I'm still kind of worried about how to make that work.
I hear you. And the stuff we're talking about today, while we're trying to offer examples from our own teaching, just so we can, basically show you that we try to practice some of what we preach, they happen to be what we teach. The practices we're talking about, though, I don't think are particular to disciplines. And there's people I know in the history of art and architecture who do some, it can be really small things where like maybe they tell you a proposal for something they're going to do and you are able to intervene at that point and give them some direction. So there's lots of creative ways to do this, because the last thing we're talking about is, at the end of the day, making y'all work more. Another thing that people do, some people in this room, in fact, have done, is take advantage of the Writing Fellows program that we offer, where students, peer writing tutors will read drafts, comment on them, and conference with your students before the final draft comes in. So some of that is, some of what we're saying we feel like in good faith we can say, because overall we'll give advice later about spending less time commenting. And secondly, there are some university resources to address that. And so anyway, so we can talk at the very end about particular ways to tweak the assignments that you have, or follow up from today about ways of really getting in these ideas. But
I guess I think you have less time in the classroom to teach this, but the principles behind it are the same. You want your students to discover new ideas, and you want to push their thinking. You want them to understand what writing is about, and to write that successful art history paper, they need to understand this process. And having this sort of language to talk about it with them, I think, should be helpful.
One really quick thing from history of architecture that I know happens in a particular class, I don't know the number of it, but it's kind of like the class that majors take at DePaul, where they learn about some of the specific genres. Trish Kelly has taught it in the past.
It's $2.99.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've heard from working with folks who teach that class that they've done is they've taken out the choice of the object from the students. They basically told them what to do, and they write 4 different genres about the same object. So you just take all that time where it's like, oh, what's my topic? What's my passion? They just strip it. Here's what you're doing. And you're writing about the same thing, 4 different genres over the board. And I think that's a really creative way of taking a lot of stuff, of taking away some of the time that, especially in 10 weeks, we just don't have time for students to like find the object they're passionate about. Or if it's a class where writing one long genre is important, some of you probably already do this. You build in stages of the assignment, so they write proposals or annotated bibliography, stuff like that. So, I mean, we're both really committed to writing across the curriculum, and we'll be showing you examples from our own field, but the research we're citing certainly doesn't only focus on writing classes.
Okay, so then this is still an answer to why do we comment, and it's really more of a philosophical or a reason for it. A lot of our material comes from a researcher named Nancy Summers, this is her with the green sweater, who's been studying this stuff since the early 80s. And Nancy Summers talks about revision as chaos in a way that I find really productive for thinking about it. And it's not initially attractive for many students. I mean, who wants chaos? But I think it's actually reassuring for students to know that, I mean, it's also writing is chaos in some ways. That, like, writing's really difficult. It isn't easy. You're asking them to write a 15-page paper on something, and they've got to sort it all out and figure it out. And she talks about that anxiety we all feel, reducing what looks like a finished draft into fragments and chaos. And then what she's saying is that when you're in that stage, you've got a finished draft, but actually you need to go back and do something different with it. Then you need to not negotiate, your students finish a draft, okay, I know there are problems, but at least I'm done, I'm going to turn it in. Well, no, you actually need to be teaching them. And that's the point where you notice what the problems were, that there's dissonance there, there's an issue that happened, and recognize that dissonance in a draft, embrace the chaos, and find what it is you can do differently and better and more productive. So she talks about pushing students back into the chaos, that the comment actually pushes them back into that chaos, acknowledges that it's scary, but gives them like tools to overcome it, so that that's where they're shaping and restructuring what their meaning is. And I find that definition of revision as chaos really useful for myself. Okay, so now more of the nitty-gritty of how do we comment. And I think the really important distinction here is revision versus editing. We're spending a lot of time on revision, and Matthew in a minute is going to talk lots more about how to prioritize things. But just sort of definitional, we're looking at revision as addressing global issues about the paper's point and development, the big stuff. So that could be having an overall purpose that's appropriate, a focus, thesis, argument, whatever it is the assignment asks for, overall organization, adequate evidence, even clarity of ideas if it's throughout that you can't get the clarity of ideas, addressing audience concerns in a way that it's so distracting that because you haven't thought about these other issues, that's a big issue. All of those things are revision at the, they're above the sentence level, the big stuff. Editing, on the other hand, is either at the sentence level or smaller units. And so that editing makes writing more readable. It eliminates errors that readers find distracting. And editing is looking for better transitions, reducing wordiness, finding the right word, enhancing pace, enhancing emphasis, any proofreading errors in usage, punctuation, grammar. And our premise here basically is that you're looking for revision type comments first, the global ones, focusing on those larger issues as your primary priority. And Matt is going to talk more about that.
So, yeah, we'll look at a particular hierarchy for approaching student writing, and it will address some of the concerns. It will address the issue of what happens if this basically doesn't do the assignment. What do I do? And offers a really structured way of doing that. Going back to our guru, Nancy Summers, one of the reasons why we argue for focusing on global concerns first is that when we comment on the local and the global and students are being pushed back into the chaos, they're supposed to make their paper better, we inadvertently, she's done a lot of research of actual instructor comments, we sometimes give them really confusing contradictory messages. So for example, you read through the paper, you notice some semicolon issues and some spelling problems, and you comment on them. Then you get done reading the paper and you realize, they had a pretty interesting thesis statement, but there was a lot of the paper that didn't really go to that thesis statement. It was just kind of thrown in there. So you say, hey, some of these paragraphs don't really support your thesis statement, including the one that you comment on the spelling and the semicolon. So now students have these contradictory pieces of advice. Fix the spelling, fix the semicolon, throw out that paragraph. So it's kind of like, what do they do first? Fix the spelling and the semicolon, then get rid of the paragraph? Or, so it just makes it confusing for some of them about exactly what to do. So we're saying, and John Bean will give really concrete advice about this in a second with a handout we have. We're saying that until certain things are true about a paper, like it addresses the assignment, first of all, that if it's supposed to have an argument, it has an argument, that argument is good. Until it does some of these things, there's really not a lot of reason to focus on the local, because as Julie's example earlier pointed out, I think quite well, a lot of the sentences need to change. And also one of the other reasons too that I feel like is important here, this is a little bit of a generalization, but I do feel like a lot of the students come to us thinking that school is about demonstrating mastery, and for many of us in this room, school is about diving deeper or finding complicated questions and finding out that the answers to these questions are nuanced and all that kind of stuff. And so I feel like by coaching them that revision is more about just changing words, but it's about actually discovering what you mean, maybe even entering into a project and thinking, deciding you feel differently about that particular subject based on what you've read. I think that's the kind of learning that, at least at times, most of us are pretty interested in. So the research that Nancy Summers has done in other places shows that if you ask students what revision is, it's literally changing words. There's no thesaurus that's going to make a bad argument better by a word or two being different. It's just not going to work. Yeah.
To the point that was raised earlier, though, that again the mindset seems to be revision. I'm in kind of the same mode where I teach a content at a graduate level, which is beyond grammar, should be.
Sure.
I have a bundle of stuff I need them to learn. I have them do 2 papers, a midterm and a final, where they're related, but they end up being discrete subjects. They're related on a subject level. And what I've been trying to do is because what you just described would only help them in the second paper, because I need them to understand in the first paper that their thesis is wrong in addition to their grammar. So when they come in with a second paper, they can rectify both of those, but they don't have an opportunity for revision. And if I provided it, would double both of our work.
I hear you.
So that's kind of where it
So
doesn't work without revision.
I mean, we are, maybe not exactly, maybe not talking about exactly what some of you maybe hoped we talked about, which is why we put our central premise at the very beginning. But we are more than willing. My job is to work with faculty to talk about assignments, so is Brenna's job. And so we're more than willing to talk in particular cases about ways to maybe address some of these issues.
Oh, no, we're getting something out of this.
Yeah,
No
but I
question.
mean, no, I don't take you to be like, confrontational at all. It's just that even with graduate students, I don't know a ton about any research that differentiates by type of student. I do feel like the more invested you are in your ideas and expressing yourself as a writer, the more likely it is that some of that transferability might occur. Like if Julie gave me a comment on my writing, I might be able to say, oh, that's an elegant way of parsing this super long sentence down into shorter sentences. I should try to write, at that level when I have a ton of, when I have restricted relative clauses in my writing, it's confusing and it seems clear to me, but it's not clear to the reader, so maybe I'll try to do that differently next time. So we can talk about the particulars. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, do you want to say something, Joe?
No.
Okay. We're trying to be disciplined about time, so we have time to do the practice. So this goes to what we were talking about before, but no, this is good. So we just want to make sure that we're not, when we comment, that we're not talking about stuff that's making them feel like they're all the way done. We want them to feel like there's a lot of work left to do, when in cases where there is. Now, John Bean will make it really clear in his hierarchy, right? So this is a handout we're going to give you, takeaway. John Bean is a professor of English, writing studies, and one of the gurus in what people call writing across the curriculum, the idea that, and this goes to some of the concerns that some of you are raising about content. So, Julie and I may teach classes more about learning to write, but there's writing across the curriculum focuses a lot on writing to learn, the ways that writing can support engagement with course content in ways that other modalities don't. So that's his big point of expertise. So what he's going to argue, and it's a lot of information on this paper. We have copies of it that we'll make available via PDF that are bigger, but just wanted to make sure you have it. Huh? Yeah, absolutely. So he says there's a hierarchical approach to commenting on student writing. You should literally start at the top. Does this do the assignment? And stop whenever you've addressed it in detail. So if it doesn't do the assignment, John Bean says you don't have to comment on that paper. That's a chance to say to the students, not necessarily even confrontationally, this doesn't address the assignment. Do you have questions about it? Are you confused? All those kinds of things. And then to spend your time on people that tried harder or understood the assignment.
And
Yeah.
then you're implying that you're giving them time then, take this back.
Absolutely.
You need to address the assignment
Yep.
and then come back to me.
Yep. Everything we're talking about today is based on one of the premises at the beginning that you should build in revision.
Right.
So, we
Or
know.
at least have an opportunity for, so they got a bad grade, but they can revise it.
Yeah.
Well, but you said that you didn't grade it at that
Well,
level.
yeah, we don't, but we recognize that
Some
we're
people
trying to
don't.
keep it real,
Okay.
basically. That, sometimes those of you who are saying that it's going to be hard to do this may want to basically give students an assessment of where they are and then say, just a game of chicken. Probably fewer at that point will revise because of the workload issue. But again, we have some institutional ways of dealing with that, so follow up with me on that in terms of our programs and other ways of doing this in class. So John Bean, I don't want to get into a ton of detail on this because it is obviously super detailed. The basic strategy here is only focus on a couple of the levels and only focus on lower levels when you feel like the paper is fine when it comes to the, fulfilling the assignment or the strength of argument. But there's just not a lot of point in fixing punctuation on a paper that doesn't do the assignment, is what he's saying. And so another one of the big takeaways from Nancy Summers' research, and you'll actually see some students articulate this in a second, about their confusion about faculty comments. But she found that a lot of what we write on student papers is like there's no real obvious relationship to the text itself. They could literally be put on any paper, and there's nothing about this that dramatizes the reader. That example before, that's a classic example that's ironic would be they, which is they. So we are, Julie was talking about this a little bit. Bean already says this. We are talking about making fewer comments on student writing than you may otherwise do, and this is a hierarchy for prioritizing those. But letting them know there's a lot of ways in which text-specific comments are the only things that are really actionable, because students are pretty confused about what we're asking them to do if they're not about their text, unless, as Julie said earlier, there's certain vocabulary about the course content that allows us to have that kind of shorthand. So here's a video of students at a community college talking about this issue.
I know we're making
Let's make sure it's louder.
When I get back a paper that is just words crossed out, it feels absolutely terrible. Are you just checking for grammar? Did you see the thought that I put behind this? I think I question them a lot. Fixing is not learning.
Is the sentence structure bad? Is the idea bad?
Good is an incomplete thought. This works as an incomplete thought. This is wrong is an incomplete thought. For it to be complete thought, it needs to sort of answer at least some of the famous, 5 W's and the H questions. Why? How? Where?
And oftentimes they read color, right, which automatically jumps to your attention, right? The color red is like something powerful. And most of the time, I'm not going to say every teacher, but sometimes you can't understand. It's a whole bunch of corrections, and they're small oftentimes.
Trying to decipher the words usually causes more problems than anything else in class.
It's like almost another class in itself trying to decipher different professors' comments.
So he starts at the beginning, basically saying bad. You got to comment bad. How is it bad? What's bad? So that's a good example of a non-text specific comment that we're arguing that you should elaborate a little bit more about what specifically was bad, and then they can do something with that.
I want to write it again.
So I guess the big principle here is to try and minimize what you're doing. You want to spend less time and spend that time more wisely. And one of the good ways to do this is to read the whole paper first before you even comment, which almost sounds counterintuitive because it takes longer to read that whole paper, but especially on those papers that you think are bad, it's worth doing. Read the whole thing through and then figure out 1 or 2 lessons that you want the student to do. Use your comment to teach a lesson. So what do they need to do? What's the most important thing here? And your comment only addresses that. Do not try and tackle everything in your comments. Look for patterns. If it's a grammatical thing that's most interfering, then just tell them what their big patterns of grammatical error are, or patterns in the way in which they're approaching things. If you're looking for patterns, you're reading the whole thing looking for patterns. You want to minimize the amount of time you spend on a paper, and that's the over-commenting. I mean, you just, again, it's like, don't comment on everything. Research suggests that short, focused comments have been more effective than long comments. Students aren't going to read everything. They're not going to process it. They'll have cognitive overload. So it's really a lot of diagnosis and deciding what it is that you want to say here. What's the main lesson that you want to teach? And then you limit the time you spend because you're writing less. And you're also, just want to speak a little bit to those of us who like to mark, who are copy editors or proofreaders. Many of us are or were. And so it's very tempting to mark everything. And that's what I did before I went back for my PhD. really have to sit on your hands, essentially. I mean, so you do not mark everything that's there because it's overwhelming to the students. If it's like that, bad. It's like they don't want that, they won't respond well afterwards, and they don't learn from it. If, though, you say you still really feel like you have to give them some sort of grammatical feedback or proofreading feedback, mark just a paragraph and say, I'm marking this one paragraph, these kind of errors I found throughout. And so you explain that, but you haven't expended your entire time copy editing the entire paper. This is a great quote. It's on the Doug Hesse handout we're going to give you at the end, but he says, no professor is capable of making comments so profoundly wonderful that a student will become a perfect writer on the basis of remarks on a single paper. Okay. So, focus, minimal, specific lessons.
Julie, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, real quick. I know in the example that you gave us, your student gave you like a postcard sort of what he was doing, why he was stuck, what he was looking for. If a student, because I might want to speak class right now, I have students saying, oh, my conclusion is weak, or I know that I don't have enough detail. Do you recommend that if a student asks directly, or says directly, this is what I work with, this I should focus on in my comments?
I do, and it obviously depends on whether you agree with that assessment. Or
I do, because those are the jobs seeing in their work too.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the dialogue then that you're having with the student. That's what that student is worried about now. Maybe that's the one thing they're going to take away from this class right now. So yeah, I think I would use those co-assignments as like, where do you want to focus your attention? Now, if there's something else that you think is interfering, then maybe you want to bounce back and forth, whatever. But absolutely, that's why you're giving those.
And we really do believe that, I mean, we know that you get some papers that are just terrible in every way on this hierarchy. We are saying, though, that if you, to save yourself some time and some stress and strain, we do think that there are one or two things that are the most problematic about it. So even though on the sentence level it might be quite problematic, if it doesn't do the assignment, that's something. So I know that some of you may feel like you have to rationalize your grade with comments, but we still feel like with this minimal approach, you can still say to a student with force and good faith, if you had done this and this would have been a lot better. And even though, and also another distinction that we'll probably talk about more at the spring workshop on assessing student writing is the big distinction between feedback and even grading or evaluation. Like you can give a student a ton of feedback, like the example that Julie gave, without necessarily feeling like you have to mark every place. So here's a sentence that has some serious subject-verb agreement issues. Here's a fix. Here's how you could make them agree. There are subject-verb agreements throughout your paper. So you're not saying there aren't just because you haven't marked them all. You're really clear that they're there, but you are not marking them all. And there's we don't have a ton of time to go into it, but a lot of the errors we see are because students are rushed. And that's another thing about building in revision. I mean, some of them don't know stuff, and there's no amount of time that's going to help them. But there's a lot of students who make errors because they're just writing too fast and they haven't read it out loud. They've never read it ever as a whole. They finished it and uploaded it or printed it.
I have a whole portfolio of jokes and cartoons.
Here's one more analogy, which is like you thinking about not marking everything. You're not going to go into a class and teach your class saying, I'm going to get every lesson that I know about this in one class session. You're also not going to teach everything you could have said about this paper on one commenting session. So it's choosing what the lesson is this particular time.
So there's just a couple more things principles we want to say. Yeah, go ahead.
On this topic, because I am with overcommentary. Yeah. I think I have a problem because I did teach writing for 5 years before I switched to teaching literature. I'm kind of mixing those because I try to do a lot of writing instruction with that, or my content.
But that's good, don't stop that.
I know. Well, I guess where I get just pages of comments for them is I try to continue the writing instruction, but also have content comments that, this is not what Shelley is saying here, and how does this correspond to what we said in our analysis or whatever. And so do you have any advice about doing that? Because a lot of these comments you're talking about are very much writing-based. Should we do both? Or, because if you're focusing on one or two things, do you prioritize the writing or the content?
Interpreting Shelley correctly, if you're writing about Shelley, to me is an absolutely important part, having to do with the quality of your evidence or the quality of your claims. I mean, in some ways, I feel like because writing is a manifestation of thinking and process and all that kind of stuff, I feel like there are probably issues of comment of content are probably issues of writing as well. Like
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
And
so.
I want to tell you to do both, because I think that students in their disciplines don't get enough writing instruction about how to write a paper in their discipline. And I'm teaching English majors right now in a teach class. And so they're students who want to go on to be secondary ed teachers. And they have them look at all their past assignments and analyze what they've been asked, and they're all over the board in terms of how much instruction, and sometimes it's one sentence. Write a paper on this. So I think that our majors need writing instruction. But it still may be focusing the lesson. There's a content lesson and there's a writing lesson, and they're so often so integrated.
And also that, more generally, using the content expertise, subject matter expertise, and discursive expertise you have to share with students. This is a kind of thinking or a genre of writing that's really important in this field. You maybe have, even if you don't feel like impassioned identity as a writer, you probably have more content or discourse expertise about the genres that are important in your field than maybe you give yourself credit for. And those genres came about because they did rhetorical work, discursive work that were important to that field of study. So the memo is really important in offices because it's short and brief and to the point. What are the two things, like two of the basic art history ones, like the form analysis? Like sometimes you try just talking about the art, and then other times you're like just putting it in historical context, right? But they're different. So those kinds of things I think are important things to talk about with students as you're helping them understand the field itself. I mean, the genres are there because they do things the field needs done.
They really value professors that tell them, okay, this is how it's, here's the genre secret.
Exactly. Did you have a question or comment?
I was just going to follow up to say on the hierarchy, it seems like the thesis, presentation, strength of argument are like where you could do the content. Because if somebody is misreading Shelley, then that falls under, the argument is illogical or unsubstantiated. The ideas are undeveloped, so you could stop there on the content before you go down into the grammar.
And where would you put, where would you put content? Research is becoming, in talking to my colleagues, something that we're more and more worried about because our students seem to be coming in less and less able to do that. So, if I had a rubber stamp, it would be research this in greater depth.
Yep.
And how, certainly that's really important for me, that this seems to only address form as opposed to content. And content is really important.
Well, isn't that then, I think you're right, strength of argument, so it's underdeveloped, ideas are underdeveloped.
And also I think,
It's not, that's not it.
Right. Well, I think that
It's not developed.
Retta and I would probably say something like, speak for you, but you have that observation and it's repeated. There might need to be some time where research, like the reference librarian comes to class, or you spend some time, it may be a bigger thing than a textual thing, where like that's something that is a big part of the teaching. And I know it seems like annoying when you took for granted that something was going to be present in the student's ability.
I do talk with them about research and how to do it and where to go. But it's a little different than handing out a 20-page article and saying, develop a thesis here, because all the evidence they need is in the 20-page article, and then they get out into what vaguely constitutes the rest of the real world in the university, where they have to do something else. And
But they're doing that. First year writing classes are doing that too, where they have a research class where they're pulling from their own sources, and so they're also
you could refer that by the evidence of what the students can do.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing this to mess up your timeline or but this is a big problem, and it isn't just me.
Yeah. Of course. There's a lot of ways in which commenting on student writing, one of the things that's pretty implicit in everything we're saying, just to make it more explicit, has a ton to do with assignment design, even just more generally syllabus design. And so we are happy to follow up in more detail because I totally hear you, and like knowing this could be an example of where you may be teaching a course, I'm not criticizing the course or the department, that has so many objectives, it's hard to pull them all off. Because if this is a huge issue for you and other people teaching this course, or people teaching similar courses in your department, that may be more of a curricular thing. Like, we need to, focus more or something. So anyway, that's not necessarily something we can address right now, but it's super important.
It's not necessarily the case.
Okay, good. That's good. That's good. So some of you mentioned this earlier, whether you did too little or too much. There is tons of evidence that praise does motivate revision, or the lack of praise discourages revision. We know that kids today have a ton of self-esteem. Like, I think we lead the world in America in self-esteem. So we're not saying this is like T-ball where everybody gets to bat. Back in my day, if you were no good at T-ball, like me, you didn't get to bat. I did strike out with a ball on a tee. It's pretty hard to do. But offering some specific genuine praise, and we really mean both specific and genuine. If there's probably you're gonna have to be in a different mindset if you can't find anything to praise, but specific is really good because students can read through the whole, like, this is a good start, but type things. Like, you wanna say something really specific. Sometimes, a good example of this is that students show a lot of passion about a topic, even if the logic is, as you'll see in a little bit in our example, the logic may be a little flawed. Or sometimes students, if they're responding to a text, whether it be a piece of art or an article or literature, sometimes they may have a decent grasp on that, but they don't know how to analyze because all they're doing is just telling you what it said. They're not really saying what they think. So there can be things that you praise that are true and that are ways of building onto, because I think specific genuine praise in my comments sets me up to keep it real when there's things that aren't there. And I try really hard not to do both at the same time. I try to say a praise, whenever I feel positively about something, I say it, and then I feel like it gives me much more license to go right into a criticism without feeling like I have to couch it in, this is an okay paragraph, but I feel like this paragraph, I'm confused, I don't know what you mean, I had to read it a lot, whatever it is, like, so.
Wait, can I
Yeah,
ask
sure.
a clarifying question? So are you saying then that starting off your general comments at the end of the paper with, this is a really good start, but is not a good idea, that students don't respond well to that?
Right, yeah.
Because it's vague?
It's not that they don't, but that if you can get more specific, then
Okay.
they will actually believe that you think something good about them.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, here's another way of making this argument. Most of us in this room, regardless of discipline, probably at least some time ask students to write a thesis statement and support that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what we like about a good thesis statement frequently, regardless of discipline, is that it takes a stand that's arguable. Like, this isn't just like, it snowed today in Chicago. Like, that's not a thesis statement, that's an observation. We would not disagree with that, and we can get on definitions of what snow is, but So it takes a stand, it's arguable, and it's the right size for what they can cover in that page, whatever it is, 5, 3, 10 pages. So saying this is a good thesis statement, while it's being praiseful, is not specific. It's genuine, but it's not specific. We're arguing we should be more specific. This is a good thesis statement because it takes a stand on an arguable position, and you only raise the size of a problem that you can address in this paper. And the reason that we think that's important is because it can be a teaching moment. Some of the students may hit on a good thesis statement, don't necessarily have in the back pocket a go-to strategy for writing a good thesis statement. They just wrote a good thesis statement. So telling them what is good about it can maybe help them learn more about what a thesis statement is and repeat it in the future. So that's why we're saying specific, genuine praise. Or it can also be a way of opening up criticisms. Like, let's say the issue is they don't have a lot of evidence. Maybe in one paragraph they actually do. In one paragraph, they make claims and they really understood the article they found in the library. Hey, this paragraph lacks evidence. Go look at your second paragraph. You really seem to say things and back them up with a research article from an actual journal. That needs to be a model for your revision. So it can be a way of building towards future work. Okay, so we just want to...
Let's get this.
Yeah, we will. We will give you a different assignment that sets up students reflecting on the comments at the end.
Most students
And that's good. Here's what the students say about it when you do it, what we're saying to do.
Most students, they have a choice to be in college. If they're here, they want to know that they're here for a reason. And the way most students know that is by having their work read word for word, line for line by a professor who takes the time to write a mini letter to the student. They direct it to you by name. Hannah, I loved your work. You have a great grasp of the literature, the topic, the idea of the paper.
This is the issue, yeah.
To continue to use your own voice instead of trying to use a voice that's not yours.
So that can, move you and you can keep on going, keep trying.
You need to have a certain amount of sweet and a certain amount of sour. The whole sweet and sour approach, which I think is a good way to describe it. And even though you're correcting a student, you're still giving them encouragement.
And you just need that encouragement, because sometimes it gets really hard, and sometimes, you don't know if you can do it. That's why I think encouragement is important, because it gives you the push, and it gives you the drive and the motivation.
A good comment says, keep going. You can reach, and it's in your grasp, and you can get there. You can be the writer you want to be.
So yes, it's funny that Hannah was the one we could hear the most, because she's the one. She's the one that just says, like, tell me I'm awesome.
I know.
Everyone else basically says, like, tell me I can do better and what I did wrong, and so anyway.
Would you, Julie, recommend kind of addressing the students' need when the comments are natural over and over?
I do. I think. Yeah, exactly right. Mini letter, right? That's important, right? I like doing that. Because I do feel like for me it's important that they see themselves as writers with something to say. So the more I can treat their words as important, and the more I can let them know they're in control of those changes. I mean, sometimes it's perfectly appropriate, obviously, to tell them what they've done wrong and how to do it better. But I do think it's, at the end of the day, it's important to let them know that they're in control. I mean, because they are anyway. The ones that just, even if we tell them what to do, some of them won't do it. So, they're the writer. They're going to take our advice or they won't. So go ahead.
Well, basically what we're going to do now is we have a sample paper. We've got the assignment there for you. This is another first year writing paper. That's what we have access to. You're going to read it, and you're going to comment, trying to put into place some of the things that we've talked about today, at least 2 principles we're suggesting. So we're going to give you about 20 minutes to do that, and then we're going to stop and talk it through.
Get overwhelming?
Yeah.
Yeah, literally.
You guys, what did you see? What did you see in the person you talked with? What did you see that you might want to implement when you comment? Any like approaches that you found the person that you talked to, like, oh, that was a effective way of handling a particular issue or something?
Actually, here's a more specific question maybe to start with is, did anybody have specific positive praise? Or did you see in your partner's paper specific positive praise that you think worked well?
Yeah.
We both naturally praise the students' passion.
We opened with thank you for that passionate.
So passionate.
So interesting.
Any other aspects of praise that,
the paragraph about the second to the last paragraph.
Yes.
He's actually got a big body of evidence in the middle of it.
Yeah.
There's analysis there, which I'd like to see, not just listing the things, but explaining why that supports it.
Right.
And we both thought that was really.
I, of course, had the benefit of writing this comment twice since I did it when we did this workshop 2 days ago. And so this time I was able to build that into my head. You have lots of passion, and your strongest point comes at the end.
Yeah. And you knew it was the strongest point because of the awesome title.
Yeah. Yes, and the title was good.
War but no beer?
Yeah.
And you can hear the incredulity.
And so then in terms of the global issues, what did people choose, and I think that we're not all going to be completely on the same page there, which is okay.
I followed the model. I like to start out with something positive, even if it's atrocious. And I enjoyed the fact that I did know by the end of the second sentence of the first paragraph exactly where this person was going to come from. So that was a good thing and a good thing to lead with. But then I pointed out that a lot of the facts when the person was trying to go back and forth between this is what side A says, this is what side B says, makes a very pointed statement about how the facts are wrong and then lays out this fact that just beautifully destroys his or her argument.
Yeah, I know.
And I mean, it said, this is not your strongest ammunition kind of a comment.
Other?
Oh, you,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
well, yeah, of course, I wrote so many comments here. I got lost in the middle of the fourth paragraph. I didn't know what the person was writing about.
Yeah, the means and the ends and the ends and the means.
Yeah.
And which way around?
Yeah.
And you don't know where he is. And also that the next to last paragraph, why didn't you start with that?
Yeah.
Because that's, that's your argument. And then do the pro and con. And he, she, whoever also really didn't follow this thing. Where are the two sides?
Yeah.
I mean, where is this? And I'm not sure I would have given an assignment like that.
Right.
I mean, because I'm not sure that's a fair thing to do. And of course, I teach a course in opinion writing, so I would say, you prove your point to me. Don't give me this right and left. You prove your point to me, and have it get stand the test of false argumentation. And things of that sort. So, yeah, I mean, I was appalled by how bad this was. Now, I don't know, some people think that they get papers like this all the time. I would just send the whole thing back there and say, let's talk.
Well, it's interesting because it arguably doesn't do the assignment, because it doesn't really take a stand on the Amicus Initiative proposal because it rarely mentions it. And Amicus Initiative is like 100. Yeah, exactly. It's literally 100 university presidents who came together to say that we should lower the drinking age to 18.
We only got that from your topic.
Yeah, because there's just too much pre-gaming and download drinking in the dorms, and there's more damage to it. And so it's a subtle part of one sentence where he's saying, like, yeah, I know that the 21 law has caused a lot fewer car accidents, but what about the damage that drinking causes that's not on the roads? So it's elliptically referred to in one sentence. There's never a quote from, and then he has the hilarious logic of, well, it did reduce deaths, but they haven't continued to go down.
So
it's all been
big circle.
This is, I mean, I don't get very much writing that's this bad. I am glad to say that DePaul students usually do better than this. So in the case that I get one like this, I do write at the bottom. I suggest you go to the writing center to learn to simplify your sentence structure and make your points more readable. And then I just let it go, because this is, to me, it was completely overwhelming. Then we can talk about, all right, like everybody else has said, your second to last paragraph, that's where the meat is. And then start looking at some of these other objectives that you had there, but just, I'm sorry, I just can't deal with it.
Yeah, but it's a weird kind of bad, because there's kind of like, there's an academic performance. It's almost like they learned a certain way of writing. It's not bad like the person doesn't have a grasp on basic sentence structure. It's verbose, and there's those weird, almost like philosophical like moves about the good. You know what I mean? Like there's a weird academic writing performance going on here, which is why we thought it was kind of a hard paper to work with, but also interesting.
I wouldn't do any line edits at all in this paper, even though there's tons of places I see the opportunity for that. But I think the big issue here is logic, and that you're making several points that don't seem to support a point or support your point.
Right.
And so I wouldn't have any kind of sentence level comments at all. My comments are logic, confusing, explain what AI is.
And you're not supporting your arguments with the arguments from the other side.
You've got 100 university presidents on your side, and you literally never quote them.
Right.
And then yes, good in that one good paragraph.
Does doing that, though, mislead the student into thinking they write well, but it's just a logical problem? I mean, that's what I don't want to do. If a
Don't
paper
you,
is...
I think they have to address the logic first. It doesn't matter what the sentence structure is. They've got to figure out how do you say this and what are the important points to make here.
Well, let's say they do that, and then they submit the second paper and they say, oh, by the way, this is horribly written. I guess my question is that fair to the student to not at least tee up the issue? And I read this and I understand what you said, and the way I tried to approach it was pick one really bad paragraph, made a general comment that it was bad, that was replicated throughout the paper, and I left it at that, so it's not to overgranularize. But I fear the student now only believes their problem is logic issues. And they believe they wrote well other than that, and so you might have misled them by not at least writing a sentence that says, it's bad.
So you guys have responses to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that whenever you give them the one paper back and tell them that their logic is wrong and they go back and they fix that and it comes back and it's still bad and the sentences are poorly structured and there's grammar errors and all that, then you could maybe say, now we're ready to tackle the other issues present in the paper.
In my case, it's the final paper and it's too late. That's where
yeah, and well, they perhaps didn't deserve the A.
They never got one.
Yeah, I mean, they because it wasn't deserved.
Yeah.
It is possible too, though, if they work through their logic, the sentence structure will become clearer. Possible. I mean, they really don't right now exactly know where things stand and where they are on this issue. But when they get that down,
happiness is still going to be a problem.
Yeah, no kidding.
What was that?
The
ambiguous pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
That's just it's not important. It's like that's one phrase. It's not central to this paper.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Yeah.
James?
So I would say too that if I was teaching this course, that in addition to my comments, in addition to suggesting going to the writing center, I would probably make it mandatory that the student talk to me at least once during my office hours. To go back to the point earlier about dramatizing the writer, this maybe Matthew talked about too, is that you dramatize the writer, but you're in a different theater now. Right? This isn't high school. This sort of quasi-academic looking writing isn't going to cut it for me in this classroom. Here's what I need from you specifically, and let's start there. And then going to the larger. I'll be honest. I think copy editing and things like that are really important. If this was a 103 class or a 104 and the student underlined their title, I'd bring that up because we had a whole class in MLA format, and why did you do this? That's the first impression. It's wrong. But yeah, I think that talking to students, working with them one-on-one, we all have to have office hours. No one ever comes to them, right? You've got me for an extra 30 hours, an extra 10 hours this quarter where you can pick my brain about your writing.
And then just sending them to the writing center saying you don't want to have that dialogue. Which I guess you don't.
And I think that's one of my problems with this, is the assumption that I am teaching a course that, and yes, I know we're all supposed to be concerned about writing, but I'm concerned about how they portray the content. And that's going to be my priority. I can't do all of that work.
Yeah, but we're saying not to. We're saying focus on the content first if you follow the hierarchy. And I mean, I would make the argument, we don't have time to go into it. I actually don't buy any kind of disjuncture between content and form. As I said earlier, there's a lot of really great work in this field of study called the Project on the Rhetoric of Inquiry. The texts we write them because they do work in the context that we're in. So whatever you're having them write, it's habits of mind, it's portraying themselves in ways that are important to the field that you teach in. And so I really think that by pushing them at those higher levels where the huge problems are, if your content is what you're focusing on, that you'll get a lot of improvement, or at least you'll be able to say to them accurately and succinctly where they're failing, like they have no evidence or they have leaps in logic. And one other specific way of addressing what you were asking about is just letting them know that as a reader, to the point of dramatizing the reader, I was confused by many of your sentences. And you're not saying necessarily exactly how you were confused by each one, because we are saying you shouldn't spend that much time. But
I would also just, there's a scholar named David Bartholomew who talks about how students have to invent the university. And in many ways, I think the student
Yes.
is doing this here. And so while we're laughing at this ambiguous pursuit of happiness for, I understand, I join you in the laugh, but there is a part that the student understands that you have to have this sophisticated vocabulary and you have to complicate things. And I'm going to pose in these certain ways, and he's being that scholar as he sees that scholar is supposed to be doing it. And I think he's enacting it. And Bartholomew would say the student is actually a step ahead of the one who writes a sentence with all comprehensible sentences, but that doesn't really tell you anything interesting. So that he might actually be making a step further than what we're giving him credit.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I would always say something about the style, because I feel that we want to give the students a sense of possibility for progress at all times, but also a feeling of where they stand in our standards. And I feel we mislead them if we don't. Therefore, there's the case in which the student actually addresses the content or responding to the assignment, and then receives maybe a grade or a grade that he doesn't expect. And he says, well, why is this not an A? I did everything you told me. So I kind of always feel we need to keep these two sides very, very clear. So maybe one sentence, your suggestion is great.
Yeah.
That's all it needs to take. You're progressing towards, these goals. You now maybe stand here. Let's work on it.
And I think a lot of times when we want to give directives to students, like do this, don't do this, it's because we're so confused as readers and stuff. So that's, I think maybe it's just another way of saying the same thing. But I also think that hopefully one of the messages we're saying that's more applicable no matter how much you take our main suggestion to add in revision is that you can say one thing and have it apply broadly, and you don't have to mark every place that it happens broadly. They can come to your office hours and you can find it. This paper, you're going to have no problem sitting down with that student and finding all the things that were confusing. It's going to be so easy, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that I don't want to mislead them, and I'm following the hierarchy that I don't get to talk about the grammar, but there's one thing that you guys mentioned earlier that I've never done in the classes where you sort of preface it, tell them how you're going to comment, and that could maybe be a good point. Like if earlier in the quarter you were saying, well, when I give you comments, I'm going to be concerned mostly about your global issues, and then if those are, handled well, then I'm going to get down to talking about your grammar. So then when you give them the paper with the comments, maybe they know, oh, I also need to work on the grammar. Like if we prepare them for that, then maybe we don't have to.
Exactly. Then you get the benefit of my eagle eye. Only then.
There's a crutch I personally take advantage of. At least we're given a sample syllabus we're supposed to use, which has lovely built-in language about what an A paper is, a B paper, a C, etc. And integrated in that is specific language about sentence structure, grammar, etc., etc. And I've got a blurb in my introduction to the course that it is important, and look at this, it's in the syllabus, it's up here on D2L, and don't be expecting an A paper if you don't meet this goal. So I could back off that being there.
Something I've been trying recently, because I've had that for all of my syllabi forever, and it doesn't seem to do any good.
Yeah.
Students,
Thanks.
They look at it, I don't think they process it, or even they can't recognize. Something I just started trying last year, I have no idea if this is good practice or not, is using, in addition to the comments, using a rubric. I photocopy a page and I give that, I fill it out as I'm grading, and I still do I do typed comments, but it's individual comments. But this addresses the content issue for me as well, because I started doing this in my upper level surveys, where it does matter if they use historical context correctly, and a bunch of other kind of very content specific things. So I break it down into categories, and then I have a scale of excellent, very good, for. And so I just circle whatever the number is, and they can really see, I think it helps me break down if they're getting the content right, like you understood the novel, that's one of my categories, about the historical context. And then down at the bottom I have the syntax, the grammar, the word choice, and they can see, maybe they got ones for all of those things, but they're getting in the 3.5 to 4 range for understood the novel. And so that breaks it down for them, I think. We'll still need, I don't have to mark everything. Sometimes I do, but I've been trying not to do that anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's
it's
one of
really
the things.
clear.
That's one of the things we'll cover in the follow-up workshop on grading and evaluating student writing. Is that idea of rubrics and the distinction between, you guys just mentioned two different kinds of rubrics, the holistic rubric or the analytic rubric. The analytic rubric, which breaks down by component. I found them pretty powerful in my own teaching because I told them what I wanted them to do in the assignment, and the rubric's basically a restatement of it. And then I'm assessing them, and some of the papers I actually liked the best didn't do some of the things that I told them to do. So I ended up giving like really high marks because of the rubric to people who wrote pretty competent papers that did everything, which shows me maybe in the future I have to tweak my rubric so that stylistic stuff that I dig is more of a part of the grade. But it was actually a really good way of checking myself. And one of the things that I found really powerful, and I think other research supports this, is once you build that rubric up, giving it to the students beforehand too. Like, so it's almost like 2 weeks out they get the assignment, then a week out they get the rubric, which is again basically a restatement of the assignment. It should be at least, and that can be a really powerful way to, you know, at least make it on good faith on your part. You have done a lot of work to try to articulate your goals. You have an ideal paper in mind. You have certain standards, and they know that, and then they can work hard to achieve those or not, or they're not prepared to achieve those goals. And you know, anyway, I think it's an important part, and we'll definitely follow up at that last workshop about that. So we do want to do an evaluation, right?